Want to learn how to make a delicious loaf of sourdough? I'll show you how. Hi everybody, this is Laura with Lonely Pines, and today I'm going to walk you through how to make a really delicious sourdough bread. It's a little time consuming. It takes about a day to put together. It has a long overnight rise, but I've got to say it's totally worth it. The outer shell is hard and crunchy, and the inside is delicious and chewy. It's the best sourdough I've ever had. So I want to teach you guys how to make it. First off, you need to have a really active sourdough starter. And if you guys are interested, I can put together a video here in the future walking you through how to put one of those together. But we won't cover that today. This is kind of for folks that already have a sourdough starter going. You want to make sure that you feed it about an hour to 2 hours before you plan on baking so that it's at its peak feeding time and it's super airy and bubbly. So I've got my sourdough starter here. Keep it covered in my cute little sourdough jar. And the way you can test to make sure that it is active enough to bake with is to see whether it floats in water. So I've got a glass of just regular old water here. And I can take a little bit of sourdough starter and plop it in. And you can see there that it's floating. So this guy is ready to go. So, since our sourdough starter is nice and active and ready to bake, the first step is to start putting together. I need a big bowl, preferably glass. Metal can have a reaction with things that ferment like sourdough, but it's going to be in it, 12 hours at most, so I don't think it would cause an issue, but I just tend to gravitate towards glass or ceramic. So we've got our nice little scale here. And first we'll want to put together 525 grams of water warmed up to about 80 degrees. So it works out to like 2.22 cups if you're not working by grams. And to that we want to add 200 grams of our very active starter. And then we're going to mix this up until it becomes a nice opaque kind of slurry. And then to this we're going to add 700 grams of flour. If you're noticing that the flour count is a little high, I should note that this does make 2 loaves of bread. Alright, and then we're going to mix this up until it forms a shaggy dough ball. Alright, now that we've got it mixed up into a shaggy dough ball, the next step is to let this go through its 𝙈𝙊𝙎 phase, which can be, I usually just do an hour. You can extend it up to 4 hours with no problems. Basically what that means is just a fancy word for letting the sourdough feed. So that little bit of sourdough starter that we put in there is now going to start eating all of that flour that we added and working on converting the whole dough into a sourdough flavor. So I will see you guys back here in 1 to 4 hours. Alright, it's been about an hour. Now it's time for us to add the salt to the dough. So it'll be about 1 tablespoon of salt. Take that and sprinkle it over your dough. And then we use a pinching motion to incorporate the salt and mix it down into the dough. You want to try to not knock out too much air, because all this air we're working on is what's going to give us our light, fluffy texture. So, salt's all mixed in. Now with wet hands, we'll stretch the dough. So we pull it up, stretch, and pull it over. Turn a quarter turn, pull it, stretch it over. Quarter turn, pull it up, stretch it over. Quarter turn, pull it up, stretch it over. And then we form it back into a ball. We're going to do that every half an hour for the next 2.5 hours to help build up our texture and slowly knead our dough. Alright, it's been 2.5 hours. I've folded it a total of 4 additional times, so 5 total. It's looking nice and stretchy. I can see all the air bubbles in there. So So now it should technically pass a window pane test. A window pane test, when you grab a chunk of the dough, and you should be able to spread it in your hands. Ooh, my hands are a little sticky here. You should be able to spread it in your hands and get it pretty darn thin without the dough tearing. And that is pretty darn thin. If we had some light behind us, you'd be able to see that that's pretty paper thin. So I would say that that's ready to go. So now we just leave this uncovered until it rises about 30% or so, which will take about an hour. Alright, so it's been about an hour. The dough has risen about 30%. So now it's time to do the long overnight proof in the fridge. You need to cover it with a plastic bag. Since the bowl's so big, I like to use a big bag. This is I think a Reynolds oven proofing bag, or oven roasting bag for like turkeys. But it works really well for proofing bread. So in the same bowl you've been using, just put it in a bag. Twist it, cover it. Make sure it's in a big bowl because it is going to possibly get quite a bit larger in the fridge. So give it some room to grow. But yeah, just a little space in the bag, and then into the fridge we go. It proofs for 12 to 15 hours or overnight, which is what I usually go for. I start the bread about, I don't know, 2 o'clock, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and that gives me enough time to do all of the steps, get it in the fridge, and then usually start baking it about, I don't know, 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. So yeah, in the fridge, and I'll see you guys tomorrow morning. Good morning, everyone. The dough has been resting in the fridge overnight. It's been about, 16 hours or so. And then I took it out of the fridge. It has to come back up to room temperature before you start handling it again. It does rise a little bit in that time as well. So it's been out of the fridge about 2 or 3 hours. Now it's time to divide the dough into our 2 separate loaves and do a little bit of shaping. So onto an unfloured surface, we'll want to turn out our dough. Ideally, you would have some sort of dough scraper for this. It's definitely something that I want to invest in, but haven't quite yet. So I use my trusty little spatula. Now we divide it into 2. And then we need to shape it in a round. Again, this would be much easier with a pastry cutter, but basically just kind of tucking and turning under, trying not to handle it too much, while also forming it into its own separate dough ball. Cutting board out of the way here. And these should rest for about 20 to 30 minutes. They will spread out a little bit, but they shouldn't fall off, fall off the edge. If they do, if they really flatten out, then you should shape it and let it rest another half an hour or so. There we go. Take note. We'll check them again in a half an hour. So it's been about 20 to 30 minutes. As you can see, the dough has kind of spread out a little bit, so they're almost touching here again. Well, now they are. But they haven't totally kind of fallen off the pancake. They've still got some upwardly shape to them, which is exactly what we're looking for. So the next step is to do kind of our final shaping and put our dough in the fridge for another 2 to 4 hour rise. So for this, you would ideally have a banneton bowl, which I don't have. It's got rings in it, and it's a traditional way to cook sourdough. As an alternative, though, you can flour tea towels and put them in your bowl, and that helps with getting them out of the bowl when the time comes to put them in the hot pan in the oven. So you just make sure you really press the flour in, make sure it's nice and well coated. Alright, that should be good. And then gonna need a couple bowls. Doesn't matter if it's a metal bowl because the towel will be in between. And there you go. My camera cut out on me with the shaping of the first loaf, so that's already done. We'll walk through the second one here. So for the shaping, pull them out this way, stretch them out a little bit, We'll go over a third, forward, and then back and over. And then let me get a little flour on my hands here. And then we kind of work him down and around, flip him over, and make sure to pinch that as one seam. So the entire outside is smooth. Shaping is very important. I've learned that the hard way. And then we transport this guy into the bowl, seam side up. And then him and his little buddy go in the fridge to rest for 2 to 4 more hours. The bread's been in the fridge about 3 hours, so now it's time to bake. The bread is baked in a cast iron Dutch oven. Mine's enamel coated, so I can't really speak to how a non-enamel coated pan would behave, but mine's an enamel coated Dutch oven that we've had preheating in the oven. It's important that the pan is really hot when the bread goes in to create that hard, crackly, crunchy outside shell for the sourdough. So we've had the oven preheating at 450 for about a half an hour with the pan in there the entire time. You can see here that I have the lid separated from the pot. It's important to separate the two in order to ensure that everything heats up evenly. And now that the pan's hot, with the help of my trusty assistant, we can get the bread in here.
Yay!
So here's our dough. It's got to come out cold. It stays in there until you're ready to bake it. And so the way Jerry and I have learned how to do this is we each grab a corner of the towel. He's got 2 corners and I've got 2 corners. And then we kind of curl the edge under and 1, 2, 3, plop it in. Sometimes it goes up on the side and that's all right. It'll still cook up just fine. It's important to give it at the top a nice little cut so that it can open up as it expands. All right. Then we get the lid on here, and into the oven it goes. The first stage of baking is 30 minutes at 450. The second phase of the bake is really simple. We just take the lid off and let it cook for the last 10 minutes. That was the last little bit of the bake, and now the bread's ready to go. The beautiful thing about this recipe is that it's always perfect every time. There's no need to measure temperatures or anything like that. It always turns out perfectly. There you go. There's a delicious loaf of sourdough. Now before you do your second loaf, it's really important to reheat the pan. So make sure that you put it back in there for 15 minutes with the lid separated from the bottom. Let it reheat, and then take your next loaf out of the fridge. Keep it cold until you're ready to bake it. Take it out of the fridge, dump it in, go through the steps again, the 30 minutes and then the 10 minutes, and then you've got both of your loaves done. Let's give it a little time to cool down, and then we'll cut one open and see what it looks like inside. The bread's been cooling at least 30 minutes, so now it's cool enough to give it a try. Let's cut it and see what it looks like. It should have a hard crust, and it should have a nice bubbly interior if we did this correctly. Alright, you can see those air bubbles in there. It's nice and chewy. And 𝙒𝙊𝙎 would be proud. It bounces back when you give it a little test there. So I would say this guy is fully done. Let's cut off a slice and give it a taste. Our sourdough starter is the oldest one I've had so far. It's only about a month old. But the sourdough taste is really starting to come through. So every loaf I'm excited to try, because every loaf seems to taste a little bit more sour.
Chewy.
That turned out pretty darn good. That's really chewy inside. Nice crunchy exterior. It's got a pretty good sourdough flavor. Definitely sourer than the last few loaves, but I think there's a long way to go to improve on the flavor. So it's a long-term project. So there you go. That's how you make a delicious, fairly simple, though time-consuming, loaf of sourdough bread. It turns out perfect every time. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you're interested in more, be sure to like and subscribe below, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!